Aloha, everyone. Welcome back if you've been with us before, and welcome for the first time if you're just joining us. This is the Hawaiian Kingdom History project, and this is our ninth session. We have talked about the history of the kingdom and the overthrow. We've talked about the church, and now we are going to begin to talk about the land. And I am very happy to introduce to you today our speaker, who is Donovan Preza. Donovan is currently an instructor at Kapi Olani Community College, an instructor in Hawaiian Studies. He has a master's degree and a bachelor's degree in geography from the University of Hawaii at Manoa. And he wrote his master's thesis on the issue of whether Hawaiians got land as a result of the Mahele. So we'll be really interested to hear what he has to say to us for the next several sessions. Thank you so much, Donovan, for being with us today. Just a few reminders. Our format will be the same as it has been. We will have a presentation and we will go to questions toward the end of the session. So we won't be answering questions during the presentation, but after. And Cassie Chi will be moderating those for us, as she has so ably done in our previous sessions. Also want to acknowledge always Kristen Young, who is behind the scenes managing the technology for us. For those of you who haven't met me, I'm Linda Rich. I chair the Justice and Witness Missional team for the Hawaii Conference of the United Church of Christ. And we are hosting and sponsoring this in collaboration with the Association of Hawaiian Evangelical Churches. So we always start our sessions with Pule, and today we have Kahu Ronald Fujioshi, who will be leading us in prayer. Kahuran.
Okay, Pule kako. Ke akua, mahalo for this day, for those who have gathered, and for this opportunity for learning. Bless Donovan Preza and other emerging young scholars who are doing important research. We appreciate the thousands of hours spent on researching the basis of all land in Hawaii. We are grateful for this wisdom being shared with us. Thank you for learning about the wise leaders who laid the foundation of a modern nation. Ke akua, help each of us see how we can use this knowledge to serve your people. Have your spirit unite us during this special time spent together. We pray all this in the name of Jesus the Christ. Amen.
Amen.
Aloha mai kako. Mahalo to the Hawaii Conference, United Church of Christ, to the Association of Hawaiian Evangelical Churches, Linda Rich, Kristen Young, Cassie Chi, everyone else involved behind the scenes for sponsoring this project and for bringing us all together, previous speakers, Keanu Sai, Ron Williams, and myself. So first off, mahalo. Really appreciate all the work that went into this behind the scenes. My research is focused on land, and it's my contention that land plays an important role in Hawaiian identity. If you take a look at our origin stories, Papa and Wakea, we get metaphors of Malama Aina, we have Aloha Aina, Hawaiian's relationship to Kalo. All of these different connections show you how important it is, how important land is to the Hawaiian people, and that connection between Aina and Kanaka. And so I would say that understanding the genealogy of this mo'olelo is crucial for Hawaiians to understand how the historical past can inform our future, right? And for me, what questions you ask and answer are really, really, really significant. For example, if there's there's three questions, and if you give me the answer to any one of those three questions concerning the Mahele, I pretty much know or could predict your answers to the other two questions and also to just kind of your general thoughts or framework or paradigm on the Mahele. And so it's really, really important for us to kind of understand. I always joke that the Mahele needs a ho'oponopono session, right? We got to dig down, get to the root, and people need to understand what the real problem is, because I think oftentimes we have misdiagnosed the problem, right? So if you want to fix a problem, if I'm ma'i and I have a sprained ankle and you give me Dimetap, it's not really going to fix my ankle, right? So proper diagnosis of the problem, I think, is crucial. And in order to diagnose a problem properly or correctly, you need to ask the right questions, or be aware of what questions you're asking and what questions you're answering, right? Because that's going to be a major difference in scholar A versus scholar B versus scholar C, is really what question are they focusing on and what question are they answering, right? So really, really important that that way. Another important thing is to understand the context or framework. Keanu talked about this, talked about the importance of definitions and the importance of language in his first presentation. And I would like to echo that sentiment and kind of take it even a step further, in the sense that, like, definitions sit in a particular context, right? And we understand the definitions of things in a particular frame or in a particular context. And so it's really crucial or helpful, I think, for us to be aware of, like, what is our general framework, our general paradigm, our general worldview on Hawaiian history, right? And what I've come to notice is that one of the dominant paradigms, and these paradigms or frameworks are often subconscious until someone asks you about them. And I think at least in the history books, one of the dominant paradigms is that Hawaiian culture has been in continual decline since 1778, right? I'll say it again, that Hawaiian culture has been in continual decline since 1778. And that's one paradigm, one way of seeing and looking at our history. More generally, just in general, I would say that was kind of the dominant paradigm that Keanu was speaking against, or and Ron Williams and myself, we all kind of speak against that paradigm in various ways, because our research has shown us that that's not necessarily the case, right? That there was this period in the Hawaiian Kingdom history where, despite contact with foreigners, Hawaiians, depending on how you measure this, but Hawaiians were thriving and engaging and being very successful during that Hawaiian Kingdom period, even post-contact, doing things that no other culture in the world did, right? Hawaii, the first non-European country to be recognized as a nation state, right? Like, that's a huge kind of thing. So over this 4-part series, hopefully we'll kind of be introduced to what I kind of playfully call Hawaii tip of the spear paradigm, where Hawaii was innovative, right? Kalakaua brings electricity to the White House before Buckingham Palace, before the White House, right? Hawaii, tip of the spear. Hawaii, first non-European country recognized as a nation state. Hawaii, tip of the spear. Hawaii, lo'i and fish ponds and system of irrigation found nowhere else in the world. A system of the Ahupua'a system is currently being studied by Ivy League schools today, right? You have the Harvards and other Ivy League schools in Hawaii studying the Ahupua'a system, right? So Hawaii has surfing invented in Hawaii, right? All of these things that Hawaii was progressive and the tip of the spear, leading the world in a lot of ways, right? So think about that over the next 4 presentations, how these larger paradigms, Hawaii and culture in continual decline since 1778, as opposed to Hawaii tip of the spear, and how that affects how you see and how you interpret other historical events in Hawaiian history. Right? My presentation today is the Great Mahele, an overview of the 3 classes having vested rights in land, right? For me, I still keep the great adjective in the Great Mahele because I have a different perspective on Mahele than other scholars who would remove the great and just call it the Mahele, right? That's based on my research, those thousands of hours that Kahuran was referencing, reading these land documents and pulling this historical narrative together. Right? The Great Mahele is I would also frame it as Western property law's assimilation into Hawaiian property law, right? So if you think about that for a second, Western property law's assimilation into Hawaiian property law, right? What I'm trying to get there is that the metaphor I like to use is that of Iolani Palace. If you take a look at the exterior structure of Iolani Palace, it's meant to, it looks very Western, right? It looks like a palace that you would see in Europe or some other European country. Doesn't really have the architectural features of a quote unquote Hawaiian architecture, right? If you look at the interior of Iolani Palace, it has all of the symbolism, connotations, allusions to all of these different Hawaiian things, right? Stacy Kamahiro wrote an article about the architecture of Iolani Palace and kind of talked about this, where the outside looks Western, the inside you have koa floors, koa staircases, you have Hawaiian motifs in the baseboards and other kind of molding and trims with kalo leaf and kukui leaf patterns and other symbolisms throughout, right? And this is a reversal of that, of the assimilation metaphor that we may all be familiar with, right? Where when cultures meet Western culture, they often are said to have assimilated into Western culture, right? Oreo is a derogatory remark to get at that, right? Where you're white on the inside, black on the outside. Apple for Native Americans, you're red on the outside, referencing the color of your skin, but you're white on the inside. Hawaiians, coconut, you're brown on the outside, you're white on the inside, right? All of these metaphors are playing on that you're on the inside, you have become white, you have become Western, right? And Iolani Palace reverses that metaphor. Excuse me. For the Iolani Palace metaphor, you are brown on the inside, you're Hawaiian on the inside. You know who you are. And on the outside, it's meant to suffice, hey, we can play this palace game. We know how to do this international relations and this other international diplomacy game also, right? So that's what I mean by Western property law's assimilation into Hawaiian property law. Hawaii's tip of the spear. Hawaii's land, how Hawaii transitioned to private property is totally unique to Hawaii. No place else in the world has the phrase subject to the rights of native tenants, right? Nowhere else in the world transitioned to private property in the way Hawaii did. And ultimately that story is one of the Hawaiian ali'i attempting to protect and preserve Maka'ainana's rights in land. Okay, and we'll go over that and build that throughout the presentations. I also look at the Mahele as an evolution of land rights, right? This evolution of bringing these Hawaiian customs, these Hawaiian ways forward into the new world, into the modern world, but doing it in a way which keeps its Hawaiian essence, and thus the inside being Hawaiian and the exterior being this fee simple private property, right? Hawaiians didn't have this concept of private property, but it brought all of its Hawaiian custom and all of these Hawaiian things into that framework at that box, right? So that exterior private property is a Western borrowed idea, but how we transitioned to private property was very uniquely Hawaiian, right? And that's where you get that outside being this Western manifestation, private property, this borrowing, if you will. And on the inside, you get this bringing forth of Hawaiian cultural values and ideas into this new framework, right? So I look at it as an evolution rather than a revolution, right? I don't look at the Mahele as something that was imposed on Hawaiians by others. Quick overview of societal structure in traditional times, so to speak. You have the mo'i at the top of the societal structure. You have the ali'i and the maka'ainana, all right? If we take a look at the land, we have islands, we have mokus, we have pahupua'as, and basically names for every small piece of land, right? Down to your garden would have a name, right? Every piece of land had a name. But then we also have this interesting correlation or relationship between the two of these, right? This is where we get terms like ali'i ai moku, ali'i ai ahupua'a, the ali'i of a moku, the ali'i of an ahupua'a, right? Where this hierarchy in society correlates to or corresponds to this hierarchy in land, right? The higher ranking you were, the more land you got. If you were in a mo'i, you got an island. If you're an ali'i, you got a moku or an ahupua'a. If you're a maka'ainana, you got your house lot. You got a smaller piece of land, right? And we have these terms that describe the connections between these two, between the societal hierarchy and the land hierarchy. And this is the system generally referenced as kalai aina, kalai to carve, aina the land, the system of redistributing the land. This system was in place prior to contact in 1778. 1778 is when Hawaii is quote unquote discovered, right? When Captain Cook comes to Hawaii and puts us on the map and makes us known to the rest of the European world, right? With the arrival of foreigners, we get the introduction of leasing. So post 1778, foreigners arrive in Hawaii and they are not participating in the traditional system. They are getting land in what we would know as leasing or renting, land in exchange for money, right? They're not showing up for po'alimas on Fridays, and they're not in the land in exchange for service, right? This kalai aina system was land in exchange for service. You wanted land, you went to a chief gave you land, you owed land, you owed allegiance and the productions of your hands to that chief, right? So after 1778, as more and more foreigners come, we get a second system, a second kind of relationship with land being developed, and that is that of leasing. In 1810, we get another shift with the 5 Kona uncles, those Kona chiefs who helped Kamehameha unify the Pai'aina. And by 1810, you get the unification of Hawaii. And now Kamehameha the Great is faced with a new challenge to maintain pono, right? He's the first chief that has to maintain a pono relationship with land in a unified Hawaiian kingdom, right? First Hawaiian chief to unify the kingdom, he's facing a new dilemma. How do I now maintain peace now that I have squashed all of the competition, so to speak, right? And this is where this is where we start to get an evolution to what looks like private property, right? Where the 5 kona uncles get limited hereditary succession, right? So in traditional times, all land would belong to the king and was held at the king's will. For the 5 kona uncles, Kamehameha the Great granted them hereditary succession to where their land could be inherited by their children, right? Thus, negotiating that relationships, those domestic relationships with his chiefs in this new way, but also in this slow evolution to kind of these early principles of private property, right? Where you can pass land down to your heirs rather than land going back to the chief that you got it from, right? So this is what I mean about kind of this evolution of land tenure rather than this revolution, right? In 1839, we have the most significant event for private property, and this is the 1839 Declaration of Rights. Without the 1839 Declaration of Rights, there is no need for a mahele. There is no mahele without the 1839 Declaration of Rights, right? Because you needed a mahele to divide out rights, because in 1839, rights were declared. Right? Rights that the Hawaiian class did not have traditionally at any time prior to this, right? 1839 essentially marks the beginning of personal and real property for the Maka'ainana class. On many levels, the Maka'ainana, in terms of land, became equal to, in a sense, the Konehiki class, as they were now land managers. Prior to 1839, the Maka'ainana class could not hold land or manage land in the way that the ali'i could, right? So personal and real property established for the Maka'ainana class in 1839. As a result of that, as a result of now having rights in land, now people had to divide out those rights or mahele those rights, and that would come 9 years later in the quote-unquote Great Mahele. Right? So 1839, significant event in Hawaiian history for the Maka'ainana class. After 1839, this is where we have that evolution to property. And this is our Iolani Palace metaphor, right? If you look at it from the outside, private property looks very Western. If you look at how Hawaii transitioned to private property, very uniquely Hawaiian. So keep in mind, we essentially have 2 systems in play since 1778. We have that traditional kalai aina system on the bottom, where we have kalai aina and then this evolution to limited hereditary succession to some of the chiefs. And then we also have this system of leasing that's going on between the chiefs and the foreigners, where a foreigner comes to Kamehameha the Great and says, hey, Kamehameha, I'd like some land. And Kamehameha gives him some land and in return receives $100 a year or $10 a month, or whatever the terms of that lease are, right? So those are the 2 systems there, okay? This is going to be important to understand the mahele because they're going to deal with these systems separately, so to speak, right? Because they're 2 different things. Those 2 systems, kalai aina and leasing, we're gonna throw some symbology on them. That traditional system is that white box, And that leasing system is that box you see there. Within the white box, within Kalai'aina, you're going to see that that traditional system in 1839, there are but 3 classes of persons having vested rights in land. First, the government, next, the chief, third, the native tenants. So that green, orange, and yellow box correspond to those 3 classes of people having rights in land as defined by the 1839 Declaration of Rights. Okay. So, trying to bring across the point that we have 2 different systems in play at this time. Leasing between the chiefs and foreigners, and the traditional system, land in exchange for service. Leasing, land in exchange for money. Traditional, land in exchange for service. Right? And these are the 2 different systems that are going on. Right? In the traditional system, if I want land, I have a right to land. But with that right comes the responsibility of service and allegiance to a chief, right? And also my personal, and I don't have any personal or real property rights in that traditional system, right? Establishing rights in land, 1839 Declaration of Rights and the 1840 Constitution. So quick rhetorical exercise. What does mahele mean? To divide. Next question that follows then is, well, what's being divided? All right. The common answer to this question is the land. We're dividing the land. For this presentation and the next 3 following presentations, I'd like you to think of the mahele as a division of rights in land. As a result of dividing rights in land, people received land. But if I didn't have the right in the first place, there would be nothing to divide to get me land, right? And this is the significance of the 1839 Declaration of Rights and the 1840 Constitution. Even more significant that it is codified in law in the Constitution, right? And this is where is very important, because this is able to happen because the evolution of Hawaiian history is very different than that of other quote unquote indigenous peoples, right? Hawaii is the first non-European recognized country in the world. That happens 4 years after this Declaration of Rights. The significance of that historical fact is that it means that power played out very differently in Hawaii than it did in, say, North America, Canada and the First Nations people, New Zealand and the Maori, right? Hawaiians were in control of governance in the 1840s. Thus, they were running the ship. They were running the show, so to speak, right? So when they then participate in something like the creation of private property, they're in charge, they're in power, albeit with foreign advisors, but they are running the ship. They're not a colony of another place that came in and took over. They're, in 1843, a recognized country. And that's the context, and that's the frame, and that's kind of the significance of how you view Hawaiian history, right? If I had to really generalize and say what's the difference between Keanu Sai, Ron Williams, and Donovan Preza's scholarship and those of others, it's that fact right there. How we deal with 1843 and how 1843 helps to influence our other interpretations and how we see power playing out in the Hawaiian Kingdom during that time, right? Okay, if it's rights being divided in land, who has rights, right? If you go to the 1840 Constitution, you will see that this is where custom was codified into law. Not only was it codified into law, it's codified into the highest form of domestic law, right? Constitutional law, right? All statutory laws, all subsequent laws have to be in line with constitutional law, right? Constitutional law trumps everything else. And that's how significant the 1839 Declaration of Rights is, right? All of this is codified into law. We're not arguing for Hawaiian custom to be recognized. It's already constitutional law in the Hawaiian Kingdom, right? That's a huge difference between the evolution of Native American Indian law and Native Hawaiian law. 1840 Constitution. The origin of the present government and system of polity is as follows. Kamehameha I was the founder of the kingdom, and to him belonged all the land, from one end of the islands to the other. And this is where you have to understand land has different connotations depending on the context you're talking, right? Land, kana iaupuni, the sovereignty of the land, right? The conqueror, that sovereignty belongs to Kamehameha the Great. Land, sovereignty of a country, right? Though it was not his own private property. Now we're talking about land, real estate, right? If you own land, you still pay your property taxes subject to the sovereignty of the country. You still are subject to zoning laws, the sovereignty of the country, and these other things, right? You own your land within that larger, broader context, right? But this is where this is really significant. It was not his own private property. It belonged to the chiefs and people in common, of whom Kamehameha I was the head, right? And this is where we're pulling Hawaiian custom, where the king didn't own it by himself. The chiefs had some rights in land. The maka'ainana had some rights in land. If you go back to that traditional triangle, the mo'i had rights, the ali'i had rights, and the maka'ainana had rights, right? And those rights are codified here in the Constitution. That one sentence is hugely significant, right? It's the difference between having rights and not having rights. It's that acknowledgement that, yes, if we're talking about France, all of the real property would belong to the King of France. In Hawaii, all of the real property belongs to the king, the chiefs, and the maka'ainana. Very different phenomenon, right? The historical reference that they pointed to in Privy Council discussions was that of Prussia. Prussia had a similar thing going on where rights to land were acknowledged, right? This is not what France did. This is not what Great Britain did. This is not what other monarchies around the world did, right? Prussia and Hawaii are the only two examples that I know of that kind of did this. It belongs to the king, the chiefs, and the people division. This gets refined in the Principles of the Land Commission. There are but three classes of persons having vested rights in the land. First, the government, second, the landlord, third, the tenant, right? The 1840 Constitution is the establishment of this concept of government that is separate from the person of the king. Prior to 1840, the king is the absolute monarch. Both he is the person and he is the government, right? Both of those functions are within that one person who holds absolute power. After 1840, those two hats, so to speak, get separated. This concept of government is established, and that concept of government, its powers get divided into what becomes the executive, legislative, and judicial branch. But you also have the mo'i, who is the head figure, so to speak, for this process, right? Three classes having rights: first, the government, and the landlord, third, the native tenants, right? And this is where, though it was not his own, the governments, it belonged to the chiefs, the landlords, and the people in common, the tenants, right? As a result of this codification of rights in land, you now have to divide out people's rights in land, right? 1839 defines and declares rights in land. 1848 then goes to take those rights and divide them out and put land in the hands of the people, right? This could have very easily have been done the other way, where the people and the chiefs got no land and it just all belonged to the son of the conqueror. But that's not how it happened, right? They acknowledged that historically it was done this other way, and thus we have the need for the Mahele. Ironically, I say ironically because oftentimes today in the Hawaiian community, we have this perception, this belief that Hawaiians didn't own land, right? And so this is where I say ironically, Ralph Kuykendall, who's a foreigner, acknowledges, yes, you did own land, right? We find in 1840, the first admission by the king and chiefs that the common people had an actual ownership interest as distinguished from a mere right of use in the lands of kingdom, right? So here, Ralph Kuykendall is telling Hawaiians, hey, Hawaiians, you own land. And then ironically, Hawaiians in 2022 are of the mindset that we didn't own land, right? So he's telling you, hey, that thing over there, it's yours. And then here we are in 2022 saying, no, Hawaiians didn't own land, but it's ours, right? It's, this is where for me, if we understood the historical significance and we didn't resist, right? We have this coup resistance mindset when it comes to any historical thing that happened after 1778. If we understood what happened, we could have a very different outlook on a lot of things, right? And we'll get more into that later. It's kind of early in our presentation to get into the Hawaiians didn't own land thing. But this, for those of you familiar with Western property law and the bundle of sticks metaphor, Western property law is often described in this bundle of sticks metaphor. And what this is basically saying is, hey, you own the whole bundle, not the one stick that says you get to use that land, right? Native Americans are fighting for their customary use of land. The Maori are fighting for their customary use of land, but they don't quote unquote own it in the eyes of Britain and in the eyes of the United States. In the Hawaiian Kingdom, the Constitution tells us Hawaiians owned the land. Right? So why would we give it away conceptually and then to fight for it back if it was already ours according to the Constitution in 1840? So this is how that white box kind of lays out. There are but three classes having rights in land. First, the government, second, the chiefs, third, the native tenants. Right? So the 1839 Declaration of Rights defines these three classes, these three entities as having rights in land. As a result, we now have to mahele or divide those rights. As a result of maheleing those rights, you'll get the government lands, you'll get konihiki lands, i.e. your ali'i trusts, Kamehameha schools, Queen Emma, Lili'uokalani, Lunalilo Trust, Lunalilo Homes, right? And then you get your native tenants with their kuleana lands and other forms, right? But this is the foundation for all of those other terminologies and conceptual categories that follow, right? All comes from the Declaration of Rights. Keep in mind, you also have this second system. This is system of leasing, where foreigners are leasing directly from a king or chief, right? So come time to mahele, we have these two things that we have to figure out, right? There's not just one system, there's multiple systems. We got to figure out the rights of these three classes, and we also got to figure out the rights of foreigners. But it wasn't only foreigners, it was actually foreigners and natives also. There were many Hawaiians who were participating in this blue box system. And the only reference I've seen to this is in Kaikendall, and it's one sentence, and it cites a old Hawaiian language newspaper where there's a conversation about Native Hawaiians. It was about the quote unquote rich Native Hawaiians who were not participating in the traditional system. They were working for the foreigners. So they were working in the cash economy. So when they got a piece of land, they were getting it in the leasing system, as opposed to the I'm showing up for po'alimas on Friday, land in exchange for service system. And that's the only reference I've ever found that explains why there were both natives and foreigners who were engaged in this system outside of Kalai'aina. So who has rights in land? Well, the Constitution tells us the government, the chiefs, the native tenants. Where can we find this? 1839 Declaration of Rights, 1840 Constitution, 1846 Principles of Land Commission. Right? So without the 1839 Declaration of Rights, there is no need for a mahele. This is significant because custom gets codified into constitutional law, the highest form of law. This is something that other indigenous people do not have. They're fighting to get their customs recognized, and custom in the hierarchy of law is even statutory law, which is below constitutional law. Right? Here we have constitutional law, and we conceptually like to give it away. Right? Hawaiians didn't own land. We just give that whole constitutional protection away. The rest of these presentations will answer the question of how were the undivided rights in land divided, right? And that's the second presentation, the third, and the fourth. Second presentation is on the government, the third is on Konehiki, and the last is on the native tenants, right? So we're going to take a look at each of those different classes individually. And while we look at those classes individually, we're going to be able to answer different questions. Did the Maka'ainana get land or not? Who benefited from the mahele? What role did the government play in protecting the Aina and the Kanaka? Right? All of these different questions can get answered in those different, by looking at those different conceptual boxes, so to speak. What we're going to take a look at now is that blue box. Because as explained, the traditional system is going to be presentation 2, 3, and 4. So we're going to take a look at this leasing system, that blue box, those oral gifts, as we'll call them, dealing with the introduced system, right? And this is the first thing that the Land Commission does in 1846. 1845, 1846, the Land Commission is created, and this is the first work that the Land Commission is tasked with doing. Right? We're not looking at the traditional system, not looking at government convenience. We're taking a look at that blue box, right? What I will call oral gifts. And they're oral gifts because there was no written documentation in this time, right? We don't get writing in Hawaii until 1825-ish, right? Prior to that, we don't have a written language, we have an oral language, and that's where that oral reference is from. If a foreigner wanted a piece of land, the king orally gifted him that land, right? We didn't write a written document in 1800. Not always, there are a few here and there, but oral gifts. Establishment of the Land Commission to be a board for the investigation and final ascertainment or rejection of all claims of private individual, whether natives or foreigners, to any landed property acquired prior to the passage of this act, right? So the Land Commission is investigating claims to land by natives or foreigners prior to 1846. And the claims that they're initially looking at are these claims that are outside of Kalai'aina. And that's why the whether natives or foreigners, that was that reference to the Kuykendall article or quote footnote talking about the natives that would participate in this were those that were participating outside of the quote unquote rich Hawaiians, because they were participating in the cash economy and not the subsistence economy. Okay. Harris v. Carter, the commission was authorized to consider possession of land acquired by oral gift of Kamehameha I or one of his high chiefs as sufficient evidence of title to authorize an award. Right? So that's where I get that term, oral gift. You got to watch out, us academics, we like to make up our own words and our own terminology. So here I put the reference for that. I'm not making up my own terms so that someone can quote me and I can live in perpetuity in the history books. This is from Harris versus Carter, right? Oral gifts. So that's where I get that reference from. Here we have Land Commission Award number 1. We're going to take a look at various different Land Commission awards to kind of get a feel for them. There can be no doubt, therefore, that title is in the government, unencumbered, except by the residents of Voss's lease, right? So Land Commission Award number 1 is a lease to John Voss where title is still held by the government. The government owns it, John Voss has the terms for this lease, right? John Voss's lease gets recognized by this Land Commission Award. In one of our other presentations, we're going to figure out that one of the reasons, what I would consider the main reason for the Mahele, one of the main reasons for the Mahele was Kauikeoli's desire to create private property. He wanted to create private property because he understood that private property was respected in the event of imperial takeover. If another country came into Hawaii and took Hawaii over, all public property would be acquired by that invading country. All private property would remain in the hands of those individuals who held that property, right? So the whole purpose of the Mahele is to get whatever land is in the hands of people, get that land in private property so that if a foreign country comes in, that land will be respected, right? For example, Great Britain and the Paulette Affair in 1843, Britain comes in, lowers the Hawaiian flag, raises the British flag, and occupies Hawaii for a good 6 months, approximately 6-month period, right? Had that stood and stayed, right? If we didn't have La Ho'i Ho'i'ea, the day sovereignty was returned, if we didn't have Admiral Thomas come and rectify that wrong, then all 4 million acres would have went to the King of England, right? So that was one of the main impetuses for wanting to create private property, right? But here we have a lease to John Voss. Here we have Land Commission Award 2937 to William Harberado. The present claim is for different lands which are situated in the island of Oahu, Hawaiian Islands, all of which were received by the claimant from his father in the year 1882. Received them from Kamehameha I a long time before and held them without dispute to the time when he left them to his son, the claimant, at his death. We therefore award to the claimant, William Harberado, a freehold title to these lands less than a lodio, which he may commute for a fee simple title in accordance with the lands subject to so on and so forth. There's a lot of important terminology for those interested in kind of the details of Hawaiian land titles. We therefore award to the claimant William Harberado a freehold title less than a lodio, which he may commute for a fee simple title, right? Commute means to exchange. So you can tell he doesn't have a fee simple title if he can exchange for it, right? He can exchange for the fee simple title, meaning he does not yet have it. And we'll go over freehold less than a lodio in another presentation, or I think later in this one actually. right? But William Harberado has a freehold less than allodial. 5 slides from now, we're going to find out that that means a life estate, a lease for the duration of a person's life, right? Instead of a lease for 1 year or 2 years, a lease for as long as you're alive. Land Commission Award number 433 to William Croningberg. And we do therefore award to the claimant, William Croningberg, a freehold title less than allodial, or in other words, a life estate. Right? Here we have that term, freehold less than allodial, defined within the context of the document as to mean a life estate. Right, so here we have another example of a life estate or a freehold less than allodial. Here's the royal patent upon confirmation of Land Commission for this same award. And this is where William Croningberg exchanges for the government's right in land and thus receives the fee simple title, right? This day, therefore, Kamehameha, by the grace of God, by this royal patent, makes known unto all men that he has for himself and his successors in office, granted and given absolutely in fee simple unto William Croningberg, right? With the Land Commission Award, he has a life estate. With the royal patent, he has fee simple title to this land, right? And we'll explain all of these legal terminologies in subsequent presentations, trying to introduce some of that terminology here. But more importantly, to kind of show you all of these early leases to foreigners, right? Here's an interesting one, Land Commission Award 807. To have and to hold the same during the term of 299 years, free of all rents. This is a lease, a 299-year lease where the lessee pays 0 rent. But this award is upon the following express condition, namely that at the expiration of that lease, the land with all houses, tenements, and buildings and improvement shall revert to the Sandwich Island government, right? So Andrew Auld doesn't own this piece of land. He gets to use it for 299 years. And if Royal Hawaiian Shopping Center is on that piece of land 299 years later, it reverts back to the Hawaiian Kingdom government, right? So hopefully you see that you have to read every single one of these stories. Each one of these pieces of land has a story in and of itself. It's very hard to generalize the Mahele. You really have to read the story for each piece of Aina, right? Because they're all different, as we've seen. One was a lease, one was a life estate. This one's a 299-year lease with a reversion, right? It's all different. Land Commission Award 690 to Louis Gravier. This is where you get a definition for the rights of the king or government, right? This one, Kekuanaʻa granted a fee simple title, which was more than he had any right or power to convey, as they thereby conveyed away the rights of the king or government in the land. And the Land Commission has no power to grant such a title. So they sent this one back to Privy Council. The king discussed it in Privy Council, and the king waived the government's interest in this piece of land, ultimately granting Louis Gravier a fee simple title as a favor to Kekuanaʻa, who had in previous times given land back without compensation. It's complicated stories. And this is literally the only document that I've ever found that tells you what the rights of the government were. And that was the fee simple, right? You need to understand what the rights of the government were in order to understand commutation, because the commutation is in exchange for the government's right. Well, what's the government's right? Well, this is literally the only document in thousands of documents that I've read that has stated that the government's right is the fee simple. Everything else you would have to infer. But here you see an example of a fee simple title, right? So we've had all the 3 major classes of property in Western property: fee simple, life estate, and a lease. And these all are different oral gifts to various different foreigners. Right? This same Land Commission Award to Louis Graver, or a different one to Louis Graver, LCA 692, was also a freehold less than allotio or a life estate in the land of Paukawila. Right, so Louis Graver dies, this land then reverts back to the government, and then the government sells it as royal patent grants to Hawaiians. Right, so this is a very complicated piece of land because a foreigner holds it, he dies, it goes back to the government, then the government sells it to natives. Right? And all of this happens in Privy Council, right? Resolved that the life estate of Louis Graver in Paukawila, having expired by his decease, the same be placed in the hands of Mr. Emerson to be disposed of to natives. Right? So here we see that life estate, someone was granted a life estate, he didn't exchange for the fee simple, and we see that life estate reverting back to the government according to how it Western property law works, so to speak. Right? So those are examples of the leases, and following presentation 2, 3, and 4 will be for the green, orange, and yellow box. Land Commission Awards, oral gifts, where to find. The originals are at the Hawaii State Archives, microfilm also at the Hawaii State Archives. Digital copies also at the state are on their availability to the public, but maybe Ron can chime in on that later. You have transcriptions of these at www.avakonehiki.org. When I was working at Hawaiian Studies, we worked on a project, Ava Konehiki, and what we did for that project was we transcribed all 10,000 plus Land Commission awards so that they would be full text searchable, right? And so if you want to know every single Land Commission award that mentions the word kalo or uala, or you name the word, it's now searchable and you can go find it in a Land Commission document, right? As a land title guy, I was interested in how many of these land commissions mention the word freehold less than allotio, right? And so you can do all kinds of research, all kinds of searching because they're full text searchable. The kinds of information in this document, you'll find place names, you'll find people's names, the story of how they got lands. These ones aren't going to have surveys because they're not the Kuleana Awards, right? These are a different thing. And that's another important thing to understand is the Land Commission investigated different kinds of awards. They investigated oral gifts, they investigated Konehiki Awards, and they investigated Kuleana Awards, right? But in 1846, their original task was to look at these oral gifts, not the Kuleanas. We will come into that discussion when we talk about the Kuleana lands. All right, but this is why it's important to dig in and to really kind of understand the details of the Mahele. Look at that, I left time for questions.
Mahalo, Kumu Donovan, for that first presentation. We do have some questions here. So to start here, our first question is preparing affidavits and declarations for Land Court and Bureau of Conveyances based on Penal Code of 1850, Civil Code of 1859, and laws of 1872. Would love your mana'o on this.
Let me just give a brief background and context for those. So in Hawaii, we have two systems of recording land, or not recording. We have two systems. We have the Bureau of Conveyance and you have Land Court, right? So the Bureau of Conveyance is a system where people record title to land, right? In that system, you don't technically own your land until you record all of your deeds and evidence in the Bureau of Conveyance. So if a question ever comes to title or ownership, a judge can then adjudicate and make a decision and say, yes, you own, no, you do not own. All right. So it's a system of recording evidence. In land court, there's a judge, there's a sitting judge that sits and adjudicates, right? So in land court, you're required to file information on a piece of land, and you can be no more than one document, so to speak, out of compliance, right? So if you get married, you have to file that in land court so the judge can file that, then adjudicate. And so you're never 10 transactions away from ownership. You're at most supposed to be one transaction away, right? So it's like keeping up to date, by the transaction, and that's land court. Land court by itself is a very useful system because you have to be up to date, right? But land court also has a history in Hawaii where land court was used. W.D. Alexander was sent to Australia to go figure out what system they used to disenfranchise the Aborigines of land. And then they got that system, which was called the Torrens system. And they brought the Torrens system back to Hawaii and implemented it in 1903, 1905, so to speak, right? So as a system, it's very useful. How it was, the context in which that system was historically applied in Hawaii is very problematic, right? Most of the people who used land court were the sugar companies, right? Because like, if you think of what land court is basically state-backed title, right? A state of Hawaii judge sits and says, yes, you own this, no, you don't, right? Or if we're in the 1900s, a territory of Hawaii judge, right? But the state, the country, that entity is backing up your title, right? So if you think of this historically, sugar overthrew Hawaii, who overthrew the government, became that new government, and then created the land court so that they could then provide security on title for Hawaiian land in Hawaii. So it's the crooks, the thieves, backing up their own theft with their own institutional process called land court, right? And now you have state-backed title. So as long as the state is in existence, your title is safe, right? Like that's what's happening with land court is we overthrew the country, we overthrew the government, created a new government, then that government created a government institution that will guarantee title, so to speak, right? So this is where it's very costly because you have to basically adjudicate title for every step of the way. So the only entities that use land court were sugar, but they were also the ones that were trying to disenfranchise kuleana rights and these other rights in land to clear title. And they needed to clear title because the 1840 Constitution declared rights in land for these, right? So this is where you have to like understand how significant 1840 is in that. I don't know that answers the question of preparing affidavits and declarations, but that's just a basic history on land court and the Bureau of Conveyances.
Thank you. Someone asked, the Konohiki managed land. What was the title for those who managed water?
That's a good question. I will have to look that one up and see, find that reference. I don't have that answer off the top of my head.
Okay.
Ron can jump in if he's seen that, but I don't have that answer on the top of my head.
Yeah, okay, sounds good. I see some collective knowledge happening in the chat anyway, so maybe someone else knows. Who is considered ali'i in our modern times? Who would manage the lands now?
Sorry, say that one again. I was reading a question and got thrown off.
Okay. Who is considered ali'i in our modern times? Who would manage lands now?
Who is considered ali'i in? Well, that's gonna be determined by what framework you subscribe to, right? If are you subscribing to international law, therefore invoking you have to go back to the laws of the country that were in place at the time? Then there's going to be the debate, is that the 1864 Constitution or is that the 1887 Constitution? So this is where the frameworks are really important, and understanding, like, the question I always ask, and I think is important to ask in this context, is by what authority, right? So what is the kumu? What is the source? What is the authority that you're invoking and agreeing to subscribe to, right? Like, if I'm invoking authority A and you, Cassie, are invoking authority B, then we're just going to be talking past each other and there's no resolution, and it's your opinion versus my opinion. If we agree, hey, it's authority C, it's international law. Okay, what are the rules of international law? And then you can then kind of follow that genealogy and logical train of thought from there. So for me, it would be international law. You gotta implement the laws of the occupied country. What are the laws of the occupied country? 1864 Constitution, 1887. There can be a debate there. What is the lawful constitution? 1887 was never constitutionally ratified. It's not lawful. I would go to 64. Others go to 87. But this is where we can have that conversation and that debate if we understand the important, if we, go back to that, by what authority, right? And like, if someone is invoking a different authority, then it's like, all right, we can end the conversation early because I'm not going to sit here and beat my head against the wall for 2 hours. Like, you have your authority, I have mine, and we'll agree to disagree.
Right, that makes sense what you're saying. Would you know if churches were fee simple or in the blue box?
We've looked at some of these with Kahuran, and the churches, you got to read the story, you got to read the Land Commission Award, you got to read the document. They're all different. Some were early Land Commission Awards, others were later. I think we looked at Kahuku and a couple of different other places, and this is where there's no generalization that you can say the churches can be answered by this. It's, what church are you talking about? Are you talking about Kahuku? Are you talking about Puna? Are you talking about someplace on Maui? Well, go read the Land Commission Award. That's, and this is where you really have to, like, not get stuck with the generalization and go in and find the story for that land, which then means you got to read, you got to do the research.
Got it. Thank you. Maybe we'll just do one or more here and then we'll wrap up because of time. I see there's a lot of good questions, so maybe we can send to you after, Kumu Donovan. Does it mean that any Land Commission Award that has a royal patent automatically means fee simple?
If you have a royal patent, that's the, after I said don't generalize, that's the one generalization you can make. If there's a royal patent, it's fee simple. Okay. There's two kinds of royal patent, a royal patent grant and a royal patent on Land Commission Award. In all cases, if you have a royal patent grant or a royal patent on Land Commission Award, that is the evidence that you have a fee simple title. It's like a definitional thing where royal patent equals fee simple. So yes, if you have a royal patent, you have fee simple title.
Got it. Okay, thank you. We'll send the rest of these questions to you, and maybe if there's any you want to answer before or after in your next presentation, you can do so. But mahalo for this first presentation, and we look forward to the next ones. Linda, I will pass it to you to wrap us up.
Thank you so much, Donovan. Lots of information and very educational. Thank you. And I can see that those thousands and thousands of hours of research went into your work and what you're able to share with us. So thank you so much. Mahalo to everyone for being with us. You know, when we were acknowledging people earlier, there's one who was not acknowledged, and I always want to be sure that we acknowledge that Kalani Akea Wilson was a moving force in the organization of this particular series. So mahalo to him. Mahalo to all of our speakers, and we hope to see you again next week for our next presentation about the land. Aloha, and everybody stay well and take care.